All right. So thanks for signing up for this on-demand webinar, which is an introduction to Alloy Embedded. So in this webinar, we're obviously going to provide you with an overview of our platform, go over some of the common use cases for it, and share how commerce-focused ISVs are using it to rapidly launch more scalable, secure integrations. So to go through an agenda for the day, we'll start off by providing, that product overview and some key terms, just so we're all on the same page before diving into some of the more detailed concepts. We'll talk about how to build your first bi-directional integration and not just talk about, but actually show you how to do that within Alloy Embedded. We'll show you how to share integrations with users and crucially go over the different options that we give you for doing so. So Alloy is very much not one size fits all as an iPaaS in terms of how you make integrations available to your users. And so we'll spend some time going over exactly what that looks like. And then lastly, we'll talk about how it simplifies the process of monitoring and management, right? So obviously, once you stand up an integration, that's half the battle. But ultimately, right, you do need to make sure that data is making its way to the right place, that you're monitoring execution logs, handling errors in a timely fashion. And so we'll go through how Alloy helps you do all of that at scale. Okay, so as promised, we'll do embedded overview and key terms first, right? So the first thing that I want to call your attention to is that there are basically three key steps to launching an integration with embedded, right? There's defining and building the integration, which is done in Alloy's backend. That's where you use our drag and drop builder to define data flow, which apps you're connecting, things like that. There's setting up the actual code, right? So embedding our SDK and then presenting yourself with the different options where you can share integrations with end users. And then there's actually the go live, right? When you launch the integration, when end users start reaping business value from it. And then just some key terms that are Alloy specific on the right side. They should be pretty straightforward, but they're worth going over before we get into things a bit. A block, fairly straightforward. It's a connector on the Alloy platform. The two most common types are trigger blocks. So that's basically what you're going to use to trigger an automation or an event. And then your destination. So this is the destination app or webhook ingest server, wherever you want your data to end up going. There are workflows, which are the combinations of blocks that execute a specific action. For example, syncing order data from a user's commerce platform to, let's say, your data warehouse. There's the integrations, which is the combination of multiple workflows. And so, for example, a bidirectional integration between your app and, let's say, Shopify would have two workflows. One of them is sending data from your app to Shopify. The other one is collecting data from Shopify and sending it to your app. The embedded modal is the standard authentication mechanism that embedded users or that embedded customers use to present integrations to their end users, right? So it's what your users will use to ultimately authenticate their integrations, sign in securely. Custom events. So this is when we don't have an event that is supported out of the box for a specific action that you want to do. So you can make a custom API call that you can then define and reuse across workflows, right? And a common use case for this um, for software vendors, right, which is what you are, the independent software vendor. You can see there the last definition. What that means for ISVs is that you can set a custom event, make a custom API call, let's say from your app to Shopify, and then spread that across your different integrations, right? So it's an event that you can reuse across different workflows, even if it's not natively supported out of the box. And so, before Greg shows you exactly the step-by-step of how to create an integration, we figured we'd show you what the end result actually looks like. Because this is a question we get a lot from Alloy customers and potential customers, right? Is, hey, I get it. It makes it a lot easier to stand up integrations, but what do my users actually see? This is one option. This is, obviously very well-known customer service platform, Gorgeous, who's using Alloy to power some of their integrations. As you can see here, they're using our SDK to stand up some of the integrations that they built with Alloy directly alongside some of the ones that they built natively. This is one of the options. We'll go over some of the additional ones that you have in the future, but this is just to give you a sense for, hey, once you do launch an integration, what does it actually appear like to my users? Okay. And with that, I will pass it over to Greg, our CTO, to go over the step-by-step process of how to build an integration with Embedded.
Hey folks, good to be here. So we're here to talk today about how it works and how simple it is. There's three simple steps, as I already mentioned, to get started with Alloy Embedded. So first up, you do the integration setup. Now the cool part about this is that we have a visual workflow canvas. So you go onto the canvas and you visually build your integration, as you can see here in the graphic on the right-hand side. We have the ability to create what we call bidirectional integrations. You can say, I want to sync data from Shopify to my application, or vice versa. And of course, we're using Shopify as a placeholder. You can switch that out for NetSuite, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, the list goes on. The cool part about this is that it's all visual, so it's very easy to do. There's no coding involved. And you can create complex logic flows using our pre-built utilities and logic blocks directly on the product. Next up, so once you've done that, you now have basically what we call built the template. You've built what we call the parent workflow. What'll happen now is you actually want to tell your end users, hey, this workflow exists. You need to embed Alloy embedded in your code base. So this is where the embedding comes from. So we have a simple SDK, which you can directly put into your code base. It's also available as a REST API. You'll make a handful of API requests. And just like that, you can list the integrations, and then you render what we call our embedded modal, which will present our interface if you choose to use that option. And that will basically handle all the authentication, all the OAuth, all the good stuff that you don't want to think about when you build integrations. As you can see, it's just a handful of lines of code. And lastly, you go live. You say, I've tested this integration, I feel confident in it, and you can publish it to your integrations page. Now, Alloy Embedded can live directly next to your native integrations. So you might have an integration built in-house, you might have an integration that you did with a third party, and you might also have the Alloy Embedded integration. And those integrations sit right there in a totally native, completely normal fashion. The end user never knows that they're being powered by Alloy Embedded. So super easy to get started. We'll now do a demo.
All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is navigate over to the top right of embedded and click new integration. And from that list that populates, just quickly search for Shopify, because obviously that's what we want to integrate with today. And before I jump into the workflow builder or do anything, I'm just going to quickly give this a name that I remember by clicking on the settings here. And once that's done and I save that, then I'm going to go ahead and click new workflow, which will bring us into that drag and drop builder that I've already mentioned. And because we want to action things based on what's happening in Shopify, we'll select Shopify as our trigger. And let's say, for instance, right, we want to send new customer data every time it's created in Shopify to our app, right? So you can see there's like so many different triggers supported out of the box here with Alloy, but we'll click customer created, check the output data quickly, and move on to the next step. That next step is to go to our utilities and search for our stream block, right? Which is a block that's going to allow you to paste a designated URL, whether it's your application, webhook ingest server that you want this data to go to. So click over, select the block, and quickly make sure that it's tied to the appropriate Shopify trigger that we just set up. And I'm just going to use a dummy bScepter URL for our destination here. But again, like I said, this will be your application or wherever you need this data to go. Click done. And we're just going to quickly name this workflow, save it, and then release it. And you should get a confirmation dialog here. Yep, click release. And then we navigate back over to the main dashboard, and we'll go ahead and share this, right? So we'll share it using embedded link, which is the external link-based sharing option for embedded integrations. Greg will go over the other options that are available, but this one is very similar to Google Drive, Dropbox, just any of those external link-based sharing services that you would have used. You simply select, the amount of time you want the link to be valid for, who you want to share it with, and generate it. So let me copy that. I'll paste it over in an incognito tab so we can pretend that we're our user now. And this is what they'll see, right? They'll see the embedded modal, the ability to authenticate using Shopify. I'll paste a dev store URL that we have here internally for demo purposes. And this is the flow they'll see. And it's worth mentioning that on the right side, Alloy's logo is there currently, but by using Secrets Manager, which Greg will go over in more detail shortly, you can actually change that to your own logo and hide any and all mentions of Alloy. So, we'll explain how to do that in more detail shortly. But in this case, we're just going to finish the installation quickly, click done. And once we navigate back over to Alloy, we should see that we have our installation there. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and test that the data is actually going where we want it to go, right? And so we're going to hop into our Shopify dev store, the same one that we just pasted the link for in the embedded modal and authenticated with. Going to enter some customer information here. Make sure that I'm keeping note of this because we're going to test it in a minute. Okay, so here's my new customer. So now theoretically, this workflow should have fired and I should see that information. And so let's click in to the execution logs to make sure that that's what happened. So click into the workflow, open up the logs here, and there we can see new email, new name, new customer information that we just entered is all available. So our integration is live and it's firing.
Awesome stuff. Parag. So you might be asking now, well, how does this all kind of work behind the scenes? And we've invested very heavily in compliance and our technology at Alloy to make sure we have a very scalable and robust solution that can really scale to infinite levels. As you scale, we're with you every step of the way. Now, to prove this, we work with everyone from small startups to Fortune 500 companies. And our infrastructure scales and handles the load accordingly. So a few kind of key points here. First off, we have elastic cluster technology. So we use serverless and server-based technologies to auto-scale intelligently, to understand and predict load. And we're, of course, built on a world-class cloud. So we're always elastic, the same cloud that folks like Netflix, Roku, you name it, are all using. So we're very, very scalable from that perspective. Now, let's take it a step further. So a lot of the work that we do is event-driven. And so what I mean by that is we'll say subscribe to a webhook, for instance, Shopify or BigCommerce. When an event comes in, you want to cache that information and pass that over to your system. Now, how we handle that is we have robust technology built in to every one of our blocks to handle this. And so we will actually subscribe to the webhooks if they're available. We then have a reconciliation job for polling that'll actually once an hour run and actually catch missed webhooks if that occurs. And we also cache the data temporarily to allow you to be able to quickly access that information historically if you need to. So this is really robust technology we built into every integration, and it makes your life easier. And you can rest assured that webhooks are not being dropped. And if they are, we're going to catch them eventually, very, very quickly afterwards. On top of that, for applications that don't support webhooks, like, for example, NetSuite or Magento, we have built-in polling technology for those. So we allow you to build event-based infrastructure, even when the third-party application doesn't support it. On top of that, we have fully managed API maintenance. Now, look, APIs are always changing. There's a lot of APIs in the world. Alloy has 220 blocks as of the day we're recording this, and we're going to have well over 300 very soon. Of those individual blocks and connections we probably have thousands and thousands of APIs. So we are actually maintaining those API endpoints. When an API changes, we add a new version, right? We're always on top of it, so you don't have to worry about saying, "Gosh, I need to think about updating my API." We've got you there. And lastly, we have error handling. Now, error handling is a very sensitive topic for many engineers. Let's be honest, things don't always go according to plan. There's many times when an API will break for some unknown reason. Maybe the service is down, maybe you passed the wrong parameter and configured it improperly. Who knows? Things happen. We have very robust error handling. So what I mean by that is you can query historical logs. We give you the entire input and output payloads. You can go back and see exactly where the workflow failed. You can also stream that data in real time to a webhook ingest server or Amazon EventBridge or PubSub. And we also have a new feature called our error handling block, which allows you to actually define status codes and say, for instance, if there's a 404 error or a 500 error, you can actually set up different paths on how your workflow will react to those error codes accordingly. So we are really investing heavily in error handling to make sure that as an engineer, you can be confident that Embedded has your back. Now, infrastructure is only half the puzzle here. We also have to consider security. Security is very important, especially in this day and age. We're always hearing about data breaches. God knows what's going on. There's always security implications. And we at Alloy are always thinking about how we handle that information and that data accordingly. And we're very compliant. We've invested heavily in compliance here. So we're very proud to share that we have SOC 2 Type 2 certification. We undergo a yearly audit for that. And of course, associated with that, we have a penetration test and many other things that are involved with that SOC 2 certification. Our staff is extremely well trained, and they all undergo specific training, security awareness training, to make sure that they're aware and understand kind of the implications of what it means to work with customer information. We are GDPR compliant, we have CCPA compliance, and most recently we just got HIPAA compliance. So we are really considering every angle of the data, how we handle it. Now, from a product perspective, we have a single sign-on options. We have auto locks. We have audit logs, security trails. We have penetration tests, as I mentioned previously. And of course, our infrastructure at large is quite secure. On the encryption and data segregation side of things, all the data is stored and encrypted using AES-256 encryption. That's the same encryption that banks use, right? So that's the industry standard here. Very, very secure, algorithm. All our outgoing API requests contain a digital signature. So if you are, for example, sending data to your webhook ingest server, you can trust and know that that data is coming from Alloy. It's not, you can't spoof that. And of course, all data that is in transit is being sent over TLS SSL. So standard, industry standard security practices on top of our certifications. You can always rest assured that your data is secure with Alloy. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about UI and UX control. So one thing we hear really, really commonly is, hey, I want to have flexibility and control over the interface. I'm an engineer, right? Our team is very engineering focused. We realize that we don't want to make assumptions based on how you're looking to build your application. So if we say, here's an interface you have to use, and you're just defaulting to using that, you might not be super happy if we kind of shove something down your throat. And so fortunately, we've built a product that is extremely customizable and extremely flexible. And so by default, we have our embedded modal. The embedded modal is the only component of Alloy embedded that you will actually see or render in your application. You can see that modal here on the right-hand side. Now, that modal is customizable as well. You can change the coloring and the branding. You can hide our hide our Powered by Alloy logo. It's very, very extensible. On top of that, you can use our secrets manager to prompt the end user to see your client ID and client secret. So what I mean by this is, let's say you have an application like BigCommerce. You're building an integration to BigCommerce. By default, when your user authenticates without Secrets Manager, they'll see a flow that says, Alloy is requesting access to your BigCommerce store. But if you want to take a step further and completely white label that experience, you can do that. And so using our Secrets Manager, you can pass in a client ID and client secret. And we will use that client ID and client secret on your behalf to present your brand in the OAuth flow. It makes the experience more native, completely white labeled. On top of that, we also have our embedded link. And our embedded link allows you to do the bespoke kind of one-off integrations. So if you're looking to say, hey, I have a particular customer that needs kind of a one-off integration, they have a very specific use case, you can send them and share them a link, and they can install that workflow. And that workflow will not impact the broader merchant base that you have. And then lastly, let's say you want to go completely off the grid and say, gosh, I really, really, really don't want to show any Alloy interfaces. Well, you can do that too. Our modal-free APIs allow you to render authentication completely programmatically. So let's say you've built an interface ready to collect the end user's credentials. You can programmatically pass those credentials securely, and the modal never shows. So in this regard, Alloy Embedded is completely behind the scenes, and your end user never sees any interface that we present. Now, integrations-wise, as I mentioned before, we have over 220 integrations today and counting. And that number is only going to balloon larger and larger in the coming months. That being said, we think about our integrations in these broad categories here. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have our ERPs. These are things like NetSuite and Brightpearl and Sage and SAP and many others. We have CRM, things like Salesforce and HubSpot and Microsoft Dynamics, help desk like Gorgias, Zendesk, Gladly, etc. Logistics platforms, FedEx, UPS, Shippo, ShipBob, the list goes on. Marketing automation tools like MailChimp, Klaviyo, and HubSpot. And then one of our most popular requests are platforms, the Shopify's, BigCommerce, WooCommerce's, Amazon Seller Centrals of the world. We also support those. So this is a handful of integrations we have. Our broader use cases you can see on runalloy.com/apps. Cool. With that, I'll pass it on to Rod.
Thanks, Greg. So to recap today and just go over what we have established, wait a minute. I'm just gonna okay, that's fine. I'm gonna do that again. Um, all right, thanks for that, Greg. So to recap today, there are a few key things that we've gone over, but these are kind of the major takeaways, right? And so um, workflows, right, are going to define specific actions. Again, if you think about yourself as the software vendor, one single workflow is simply the action of, let's say, sending data from your app to your user's commerce platform. An integration is comprised of multiple workflows. So it would be that workflow and then also the workflow that sends data from the user's commerce platform back to your app. And that's what would comprise an integration in Alloy. Launching an integration boils down to three very easy steps, which is creating and setting up your workflows, setting up our SDK, which as Greg showed is an extremely light and easy process, and then publishing your integration and making it available to end users. And obviously you have a number of options for how you can do that. Because embedded was built by engineers for engineers, right? Not only is customization out of the box, but also scalability, right? The ability to elastically scale to meet user demands, security. Greg mentioned all the compliance steps that we take, as well as obviously things like data encryption, best practices like single sign-on, auto account lockout after failed password attempts, etc. And obviously, like we mentioned, UI UX controller built into the platform, and Greg just gave you a great rundown as far as the different options that you have there. Um, the most important thing for ISVs to understand, above and beyond the fact that Alloy was specifically designed for the embedded use case, right? And so, for example, our infrastructure, the fact that we perform polling atop webhooks to make sure that you're always getting real-time data, like these are considerations that Alloy makes that a lot of other iPaaS vendors who were designed for automation and then come into the embedded world don't make. Um, in addition to that, we also let the business scenario completely dictate how you build integration. So as you saw in this case, the scenario was I needed to show you guys quickly how to share an integration. So we used embedded link. Obviously, as an ISV, you have that option in one-off scenarios, but you also have the ability to embed with your existing marketplace, completely design your own front end, or obviously use our modal with Secrets Manager, as Greg mentioned. Okay. So for next steps, if you're completely new to Alloy and you haven't engaged with us before, you're first, checking out our content, feel free to use the QR code right here on your screen to book a call with our team and discuss your use case, right? If you have integration sitting in the backlog that you want to talk through or a specific customer request that you're not quite sure how to handle, we're always happy to talk through those scenarios with you and at the very least share some of our expertise building integrations in this space for years now. If you're a current customer, then reach out to your Alloy rep, right, to see how to implement what you've seen here today, whether that's implementing features that you haven't used already, or leveraging them in a more unique way than you have, in your initial implementations. All right. So thank you again for spending time with us today. We hope that you found this useful, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.